Go ahead and press record. And thank you all so much for joining. I'm sorry for getting us started a little bit late. My name is Sophia Kim. I'm the director of the Science Learning Institute and just want to welcome you to the second in a workshop series on AI that we are having this year. We had a whole series last year and it's been sponsored by a couple different departments on campus at Foothill. So today we have Chesa Caparas from Anza College, actually, who's been part of our AI learning community to share on this title called More Human Than AI. So please sit back. We're going to be recording and then we'll be posting this to YouTube. So if you would not like yourself to be on camera, please just stay off camera. We're also going to be open to having comments in the chat box. And if you have questions along the way, please feel free to add them. But we are not going to address all the questions until the end. So we're going to let Chesa do her presentation and then we'll address questions at the end. But please feel free to use the chat box however you'd like to. So thank you again for joining us, and I'll pass it off to Chesa.
Thank you so much, Sophia, and thanks to Foothill for hosting all these workshops and having me. It's really great to present. I know some of you have seen me present on stuff already, so I appreciate it. I do have some new research that I want to share, or like new stuff that I've been reading that informs this topic. So, in case you're like, where am I again? This presentation's on being more human than AI and staying grounded while using AI tools. I just want to give a shout out. The artwork that you're seeing was actually done by one of my students, probably like 10 years ago at this point. I've been teaching about digital literacy for a long time, and I sometimes have my students like invite them to do creative projects. So this is one of the students, she created this piece about how parts of our humanity are being replaced by machinery. And so I thought it was a really fitting piece for this talk. I often use a lot of AI generated images in my presentations just because I think it's fun to play around with them. But I always want to honor like human artistic creation. I know a lot of it can be enhanced by digital tools, but again, like I really want to honor like a lot of the human creativity because that is also something we'll be talking about today. It's kind of like what makes us human and where does that creative impulse come from? So, just a quick agenda. And again, sorry that we're getting started late, but there will be time for Q&A and discussion at the end, I hope. Just going to quickly go over like why me, why are we talking about this, and especially like why now? I do want to talk a little bit about, some perspectives on what it means to be human. I know this is a really big question, definitely not something we can answer in a lunch break, but I hope this will keep the conversation going. I also want to talk about the importance of connective labor as something that we do as humans, especially in an educational setting, and then talk about like how AI complicates that practice and that story of connective labor, and then kind of thinking about what have we learned, and I put "we" in quotation marks for a reason. I'll talk about it when we get there. Um, and then the newer piece that I'm introducing today is this topic I've been reading about called socio-affective literacy, which I think is really important as we're entering this new era of AI. And then, of course, I want to give some suggestions because I know people would like takeaways. So I will have some suggestions and then we'll have time for discussion. Sound good? Feel free to give a thumbs up. Just want to make sure folks are there. All right. Okay. So if you haven't seen my presentations before, you don't know me. Again, like this is a piece of artwork created by a human. This was a sketch from when I taught study abroad in the Philippines last year through Anza College. Um, I've been researching and teaching about technology and society for more than 15 years. I've been working on AI literacy since 2020. And some of you might be like, what? There was AI before ChatGPT? Yes. So I've been working on AI literacy for a while. I mean, people have been talking about this for like, 75 years. So it's not like I was, a trendsetter or anything. Um, but in 2022, I did a research project on social media, algorithms, disinformation, and democracy in the Philippines. And obviously, there are a lot of resonances with situations in other countries like the United States. Particularly, what I studied was the impact on educators of teaching media and information literacy during times of political polarization. Um, and I think it's really important. You might be like media information literacy, like what does that mean or who cares? I will talk about it, but I do feel like understanding AI particularly like generative AI, chatbots and stuff. They're a form of media, right? They're ways that we get our information. And so I think that it's an important framework for us to have as we're thinking about how do we live and learn in this AI era. And especially like what is the impact on educators? So I know that we have some students in the room, we have some educators, we have people who work in educational settings. So that's going to be the focus of this talk and kind of like it's what informs a lot of my research and my, you know, thinking about AI right now. So let's kind of give a little bit of a situationer or like what is the context that we're in right now? Why are we even talking about this? How to stay human in the age of AI? Um, One of our current contexts, I think most people, as much as we don't want to remember, probably remember that we had this pandemic. We're still kind of in the midst of it. We're still, dealing with the effects of the pandemic. And one of the effects that I've seen as an educator is just the burnout, right? The burnout as we have to deal with these new technological advances. Some educators had to like put all their stuff online, had never taught online before. So just kind of recognizing that there's a lot of exhaustion already when talking about these tools and when thinking about the impacts that they're having on us. People are like, I just don't want to talk about AI because it's already disrupting things that have been disrupted for like the last 5 years. So that's one of the things that's informing this context that we're living in. We also have, the loneliness epidemic, right? The US Surgeon General in 2023 said the United States is struggling with an epidemic of loneliness and isolation. And this isn't necessarily new with the pandemic. People have been talking about loneliness since, for a long time, but also particularly since the rise of social media. So even back in 2012, The Atlantic ran an article called "Is Facebook Making Us Lonely?" So there's just been a lot of studies on how technology is impacting the ways that we relate to other people and possibly, increasing our sense of loneliness as we stop connecting with other human beings in the real world and tend to connect with them more on our phones. Okay. Another sort of historical or like kind of sociocultural piece that informs this context that we're in are the increasing rates of anxiety and depression, especially among Gen Z. And if anybody's read The Anxious Generation, there's a lot of research in there, about like how in terms of just trends, we're seeing a lot more documentation of younger people saying that they have anxiety and depression, also a lot more, sort of like suicide or like self-harm attempts. So there is this sort of mental health context that we have to really be aware of as we're looking at AI tools, because there is this new potential for AI associated psychological disorders. I don't know if folks have been reading about this. I read a lot about AI stuff. And one of these new terms, I'm not going to say it's a diagnosis because it's not a clinical diagnosis yet, but one of the new terms that's coming up is AI psychosis, right? So people who develop these long relationships, these like really deep interpersonal relationships with their AI that then lead them to do things that are harmful. And again, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. But that's part of this context and why it's really important to kind of focus on what it is that makes us human and how do we maintain our humanity in the midst of all this, especially because now we have AI agents that can act on our behalf. So AI, if you're not aware of what AI agents are, they're basically like souped up LLMs that don't just like give you a bunch of information, but they can take action on your behalf. So let's say you're chatting with ChatGPT and you're like, yeah, plan me a vacation to Hawaii in 5 days. And then you have the like Atlas, the browser version, and you can give it like your credit card information. You can give it your airline like mileage plus numbers or whatever. And it can go and book your tickets for you and like book your hotel rooms. So that's a very innocuous, or not very innocuous, but it's a relatively innocuous example compared to how some people are using it, which is like logging into their Canvas and completing all their assignments for them or doing all the work for them. Um, so not only can we create these potentially toxic relationships with some of these AI, but now that AI can take action on our behalf, this is like why I feel like we need to talk about this right now. And not to be all doom and gloom and scary. I'm not saying like, break up with ChatGPT right now. I'm just saying Like these are just some things to be aware of. It's in our best interests to think about these things critically, right? So let's kind of bring it back down to like this more human level, right? First, what does it mean to be human? Again, like this is not something that can be covered in like an hour and 15-minute lunch break talk, but I hope that, this is something you contemplate while you're eating lunch or, hanging out with your friends or every Zoom talk. You're like, what does it mean to be human? I'm going to give a human evolutionary biology perspective. Again, a quick shout out to the artwork. The robot contemplating life was created by Dolly. So I thought it would be kind of ironic to have a robot telling us, or like as an image of what it means to be human. And the information that I'm getting for this slide comes from this book, The Secret of Our Success. And when the author is talking about our success, he's referring to our success as humans, as a species. And I'm sure there's like biology and like anthropology instructors in the room who can provide their own perspectives on this. But this author's particular take on what makes us successful as a species is our collective intelligence, right? He writes, natural selection favored genes for building brains with the abilities to learn from others. So basically, what makes humans thrive is learning from others. And in his research, he says it's not just other humans, but particularly when we learn from people with prestige and or people who are similar to us, right? Like, people who are mentors and teachers or people who are leaders in our community. We learn what it means to be successful by saying like, well, those people are successful. Like, how do I get like that? Or, hey, you kind of look like me or you act like me or we grew up in the same community. Like, what are you doing that's making you successful? Like, this is how learning happens as a species, right? This is what our big brains have evolved to do, right? And the ways that we store and transmit that knowledge about what to do is through culture. And I'm not talking about culture like, pretty pictures and great literature, like that is part of culture, but culture that's like, what foods do we eat and not eat, right? How do we find a mate? And like whether or not you agree with like what your parents or caregivers told you about how to find a good mate, like that's still part of culture. That's still how like evolutionarily as a species, we evolved to like, succeed in groups, right? So it's like, oh, eat this plant, don't eat that plant, right? Could you imagine like how many historically, like how many people had to die for us to learn, like, don't eat that plant, right? And yet people still eat Tide Pods, right? So anyway, so I'm just saying, like, this is, according to this person, like, one of the things that makes us human is being able to learn from each other and then storing and sharing that knowledge through culture, right? What do we value? What makes us strong? What makes us, like work better together? All of those things are part of culture. Okay, cool. So we're talking about learning, talking about culture. So now of course, I want to talk about education, right? Because education is essentially like one form of institutionalizing that collective intelligence, right? Like we have an education system where like, okay, all these people are like trained professionals in teaching me about this specific subject, right? So think about prestige, think about status. We're learning from those people, and that is our collective intelligence. Okay. But this author, Allison Pugh, she wrote this great book, highly recommend it, especially if you're like thinking about like, what is work gonna look like in this age of AI? She writes about how education and other industries rely on connective labor. So when you're learning, when you're in an educational setting, it's not just brain dumping, right? It's not just somebody being like, I have a ton of information, let me put it in your head. But there's actually like other social affective things that are happening in that educational environment, right? And so Allison Pugh says that connective labor is, quote, the forging of an emotional understanding with another person to create valuable outcomes. It is how we see the other and how we convey to the other that they are seen. So if you talk to students, and I'm not going to generalize, but I'll talk from my experience. Like I was going to major in chemistry. I loved chemistry. It was super fun, balancing equations, even though I really sucked at it. I was like, ooh, this is like super fun. This is challenging. And what changed for me is I had an amazing English teacher, an English teacher that completely like just blew my mind. Like I was reading stuff that was challenging, and like this teacher was willing to like sit with me on Friday afternoons and help me unpack it because I was like, I really love this and I want to talk more about it. And like I'm the only nerd in class, like nobody else wants to talk about it, right? So again, like learning is not just about information dumping. It's about the connections you make with other people that then inspire you to like keep going with that like piece of information or with that like subject, right? And it's also that process of feeling seen. Like how many students can say that like, oh, I loved this class because I felt like the instructor really cared, right? And that's really important. And I think that's often the piece that gets missed in educational settings. Often we think it's like, I just need to get the grade so I can get the degree so I can get the job. But what that whole process of going through education means is that you are building connections, you are building networks, social networks, right? And not Facebook, but like social networks that kind of support you in learning that subject. I think the challenge right now is that we have this competing demand between education as content delivery, right? That's why you see like, oh, I'm just going to learn it on YouTube, or I'm just going to like, get the Coursera certificate, whatever, even though like I have absolutely no connection with the person teaching me this information, right? We forget that learning is social, that the educational experience is richer when we're in a classroom with our peers or with an instructor, or having it even if it's online and asynchronous, like the sense of having a connection with other people is one of the things that makes education so effective. I think it's what makes it sticky, right? We could easily read a ton of information on the internet. Like we don't actually have to go to school. We could just get everything we need to learn off the internet. Why do we go to school? Because it's really lonely just learning everything off the internet, right? And a lot of times you don't know who to trust. So that piece of like learning from people in our community, learning from leaders, learning from mentors is actually about trust. And that's that connective piece. That's the importance of connective labor. I promise this is all going to connect to AI. Just wait. Okay. So we're talking about education. People try to figure out, well, how do we teach a machine, right? We talk about teaching humans and there's like the social piece, but then how do we teach a machine? Okay. And this is kind of where, not the only place, but this is like one of the factors that I see influencing the separation between education as just like information dumping and education as this social, like emotional process, right? So teaching a machine, this is like, we have AI. This is kind of one of the foundational questions of AI. Like, how can you teach a machine to like think or act like a human? And so you have old systems, GoFi or good old-fashioned AI, which were like these rigid systems handcrafted by experts. They're like decision trees where you had people who were experts in the field saying, if this, then this, and like if the, so creating these very rigid structures for knowledge and information and learning, right? So that is what caused the first AI winter because it wasn't really a good model for learning, right? Having a bunch of experts give you a bunch of rules for like how to do a task or how to like move forward in a subject didn't really account for how humans actually learn. So then we have the advent of like more machine learning, these like tools that start to optimize and learn from large amounts of data, right? Like, let me just get a ton of data and see what patterns emerge, see what I can learn, maybe make some predictions, see if those predictions turn out to be correct, right? And so this is a whole different form of machine learning and artificial intelligence that is kind of what we're living with right now, right? These systems, these computer systems that can process tons and tons and tons of data, like trillions of terabytes of data, right? And then like start to find patterns in them and then start to make predictions based on what it's learning from those pieces of data. Okay. And then optimizing, if you give it certain rewards or certain like goals, it'll start to say, okay, well, if this is the objective you want me to take, then I'll try to predict how to meet that objective for you. I hope this is making sense. And again, I don't have a computer science background. So those of you who are like more technical and are like, she's getting it all wrong, like, save it, put it in the chat later. um, anyway, but what the reason I bring this up is because as we turn to these tools, like to AI, like ChatGPT or like Google AI summary, like give me the information, teach me. It's just important to note that we're outsourcing trust from community members to machines, right? I'm not saying it's like necessarily a bad thing or a good thing because humans are also flawed, right? But it's just, we just have to notice that part of learning comes from trusting the system where you're getting your information from. And in a system where people are mostly learning from ChatGPT or like Google or those kinds of things, the trust that we used to have in experts, in educators, in mentors, we are now outsourcing to whatever the algorithm tells us to think or believe, right? And that's super important. And one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of times it is because students don't necessarily trust themselves, right? Or our colleagues, right? Like sometimes I have educators who say, well, I asked ChatGPT because I don't want to look stupid by asking a human. And that's kind of also the part of humans. Like we can be judgmental, right? We can make it feel like an unsafe space to ask questions. And so I understand why folks would choose to turn to a computer system that seemingly doesn't judge them the way that a human would. Okay, so I'm not like trying to like pass judgment on people who do get most of their information from ChatGPT. Just saying like notice that that's kind of what's happening, right? Um, and then also remember that these technologies are not neutral, right? They're not like necessarily designed to give you the most factual, objective information. They're actually trained to maximize rewards. So you have to think about what is the reward that this tool has been trained to optimize for, right? And I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So if we want to talk about maximizing rewards, we kind of have to talk about the economics of all of this. Okay. And not economics in the sense of supply and demand. I'm not going to like, we're not going to talk about tariffs, but economics in the sense of what is like actually being exchanged and what actually has value in this new system, this new way of collective learning, right? Because, okay, like, back on the African savannah or like when we were in tribes, like the value came from like not dying, right? Okay, woohoo, I ate, I didn't die, right? I found shelter, I found water. And of course, our lives have gotten a bit more complicated, unfortunately. Um, and so now we have different like values, different objectives. But in the age of like the internet and social media and particularly generative AI, we have to remember that as consumers, what makes us valuable is our attention, right? What we pay attention to. And I'm sure you've heard this term, the attention economy or the engagement economy, which is basically just like we are getting mined like a resource. We are getting mined for our attention. Like there's one economist who says our eyeballs are the most valuable commodity that we own right now. And, another person who's a bit more critical says like it's really unfortunate that the greatest minds in like science and technology right now are trying to figure out ways to control our eyeballs, right? Like that's like the big question is like how do I get somebody to like stare at my content longer, right? And so it's really interesting because now we have this new economy evolving where some economists say that attention is the infrastructure of the economy. It is the quote unquote economic substrate. And if you're really interested in this, Kyla Scanlon, she's a Gen Z person, talks about Gen Z and the attention economy. Lots of great work there. Um, Basically, instead of resources like, you know, um, land, natural gas, like water, attention is what is becoming the foundation of our economy. Okay. So what we pay attention to is basically what's being traded on these markets or like, where people are trying to find value. Okay. Um, so now let's think about what this means for us as humans, right? What tends to capture our attention? I mean, I sometimes do this experiment with my students is like open up your social media, TikTok, Instagram, like on your For You page. What are the top three hits? You don't have to tell me because some people get embarrassed about that, right? But that is the stuff that captures your attention, right? The things that you linger on longer, the things that you share, click through, save, all of those things will tell you a lot about what captures your attention. For me, it's like animal videos, workouts, and meal prep content that captures my attention. Okay. But the other thing that we're learning, or that social media algorithms that have been trained to optimize, maximize certain rewards, is emotional content tends to be what sticks and what gets shared, right? If we're talking about what has value in the attention economy, it is emotional content. Usually stuff that makes us angry and or stuff that makes us sad. And so social media has been this massive social experiment where the algorithms are basically just asking like, how do I get this person to like share this content, to engage with this content as much as possible? How do I get as many people as possible to pay attention to this? Companies like Facebook realize that, oh, if you feed people really angry, emotionally driven content, whether or not it's true doesn't matter, but that is what's going to get them engaged. So we have to think about that in terms of like, this is the economics of it, right? This is like what people are trying to maximize, what certain companies are trying to maximize with these tools. Okay. So what have we learned from the social media experiment? I say we because not only is it humans learning about ourselves, but the whole reason that these algorithms are so good at giving us content that we like is because they have learned from us. They were like, okay, my goal was just to keep them engaged. What did I learn about humans? They really like to be angry, or they really like to be sad, or they really like to laugh. Like emotional engagement is what they've learned about us. And again, if you've heard me talk before, I always reference this talk because it is such a good TED talk. It's Zeynep Tufekci. We're building a dystopia just to make people click on ads. And she has a great example, a seemingly innocuous example of how these tools can potentially learn from us, and but how we don't always understand how or why. Selling plane tickets to Vegas. Let's say that your reward is like, how do I sell the most plane tickets to Las Vegas? An algorithm might have learned that the best person or the best group of people to sell plane tickets to are people who have bipolar disorder who are on the verge of a manic episode, right? Because they tend to be like more they tend to spend their money more recklessly. They tend to make more impulsive decisions, and so that was one of the things that the algorithm has learned. And she talks about it in this TED talk. And then she talks about how after she gave that example, like a researcher came up to her after that talk and said, "Oh my God, I actually wrote a paper on this, but didn't publish it because I didn't want this information out there. I didn't want the world to know that like, yes, if you want to maximize selling plane tickets to Vegas, like just target people with bipolar disorder or like people who have sort of mental health concerns that like, you can then profit from, right? So there's like hope and ethics involved here. Okay. Another example, and maybe the one that's a little bit more close to home. We just had an election yesterday, um, or 2 days ago. Sorry. Yesterday was kind of a blur, like thinking about all the returns. But she gives another example on like a lot of times companies will do A/B testing where they'll like kind of separate their consumers or their users into different groups and like say like, oh, do we want like a blue background? Do we want a red background? Like, do people respond better to both or like better to one over the other? So that's like A/B testing. So Facebook ran a test about like voting. And what they did was they gave like a certain group of people just the I voted, and it says like how many people on Facebook voted. And then another group of people actually got the little thumbnail of all their friends showing that they voted. And it turns out that the little thumbnail increased voter participation by like 340,000 in one midterm election or in one election. Okay. And they ran the test again then in another election cycle, and it increased voter turnout by 170,000 people. Right. So I think this was in like, I can't remember which years. Again, watch the talk. It's in my notes, but I can't like do the little notes thing without messing up the slideshow. But the key is that these changes, like they're learning from us, like what actually works. And it's not always an innocuous test, right? Sometimes it has real consequences for the society that we live in. And that's why it's like really important to be aware of the impacts that it's having. Because like, let's think about what this means in the age of agentic AI, right? Right now, this Facebook test impacts us as individual voters, right? Or people who are actually going to go out into the world and behave in a way based on the information they see on social media. But what happens when we have these agents who are going to act for us, right? When sometimes we don't even know what actions they're taking. We just said, okay, like find me a trip to Hawaii that's like the cheapest and like meets all these criteria for like I want to go to the beach and I want to eat good food and I want to like party at night or something, right? And it maximizes like that without thinking about, oh, well, maybe you're going to be, you know, staying at an Airbnb by somebody who is like, been exploiting their like customers for something, you know what I mean? Like, so we really have to think about the kinds of rewards that we are, or the goals that we're asking these AI agents to meet. Okay. All right. Um, cool. Let me see. With me so far, can I get a thumbs up? Cool. All right. Thanks. Thanks, folks. Okay. All right. Appreciate it. Okay. Where are we? All right. So let's keep moving forward. Now that, we've kind of acknowledged that we engage with these AI systems and that they have an impact on us, right? But what I really want to take, what I want us to take from these examples is that we have these recursive relationships with AI systems. We are learning from them as much as they are learning from us, right? So it's not that this transaction where it's like, I asked ChatGPT to go book me plane tickets, but it's more like, it's this feedback loop of like the information I'm getting from them is influencing what I then decide to do, which then influences like how I tell them to take action. So it's this recursive loop, right? And so basically, in other words, what it means is we are shaped by these algorithms as we shape them, right? As we engage with these tools that learn from us and then tailor sort of their output based on like, did you like that output? Did you not? Because with every interaction, we're kind of retuning the AI. And Stuart Russell has been talking about AI for a long time. He's at UC Berkeley. I think he's still at UC Berkeley. He wrote a great book, again, before ChatGPT, but talking about how to deal with the problem of control with artificial intelligence. And he has a great quote that says, recommendation algorithms aren't particularly intelligent, but they are in a position to affect the entire world because they directly influence people. Typically, such algorithms are designed to maximize click-through. That is, the probability that the user clicks on presented items, right? We're all aware of this. That's why we have the term clickbait. But then he writes, the solution is simply to present items that the user clicks on, right? Wrong. The solution is to change the user's preferences so that they become more predictable, right? So it's not that these recommendation algorithms are just trying to find content that's relevant to you, but they're also subtly shaping what you think is possible so that your definition of relevance gets also more tuned to their output. So again, it's not this transaction where you just ask for something and you get it and you decide, do I like that or not? But because it's always tuning itself to you, you are also tuning yourself to it, right? You are kind of becoming more predictable in order to sort of feel like you're getting the best out of this interaction, right? And I've seen it like with people who, like prompt engineering or even people who are using it to grade. It's like, oh, well, let me just like give it more context. Let me just kind of create, like put whatever I want to feed the AI into like this more digestible form, right? That it can use to then crunch its data, right? So that's kind of how we are also adjusting to how the AIs work. Okay. Um, but we have to recognize that this is not always in our best interest, right? Yes, we want the best output. We want to have like the best interactions, but sometimes these interactions can be harmful. And I mentioned earlier about this like new term, again, not a diagnosis, but this new term called AI psychosis, where people are complaining of like, oh, I had delusions while engaging with a chatbot for a long time. Some people think that they're like, going to come and save the world, or that they suddenly know how to do things that they actually don't know how to do, and it's causing a lot of harm. Um, so one of the things we have to pay attention to is that chatbots are explicitly being designed precisely to elicit intimacy and emotional engagement in order to increase our trust in and dependency on them. Okay. So again, this is not just like learning from us in the sense of what information do we need, but we're learning emotional cues from them as well, social and emotional cues from our interactions with the AI, right? And so we tend to like, again, like we're building more trust with them as we start to engage with it and it engages with us in a way that feels like, oh, this feels like a really helpful friendship, or like, yeah, this assistant like really wants to do everything for me and it doesn't complain the way like my partner or my friend or anybody complains. Like, we're like, I actually trust this, agent a lot more than, the other humans I've been hanging out with, right? So again, like I'm not telling you to break up with your chatbot. I'm just saying like be mindful that these are some of the potential effects that it has and think about how it's impacting like, other things going on in your life outside of your relationship with that chatbot. Um, because again, like thinking about some of the potential harms with AI and the attention economy, if folks don't know, there's this term called social engineering, and it's from cybersecurity. But basically, what it means is like it's a form of cybercrime that relies on building trust with targets to get them to divulge personal information or behave in ways that go against their interests, right? So, just to give you some of the examples of the images I have here, you might have heard of pig butchering scams, which basically means that um, a scammer will make a connection with you, and you've probably like people might have tried this with you. If you ever get those texts that's like, "Hey Shirley, like haven't talked to you in a while, miss you," and you're like, "My name is not Shirley," like and you're just like, and they're basically they know your name's not Shirley, but they want you to respond and say, "I think you have the wrong number." And once you do, they start to see if they can build a connection with you, right? So there's a lot of different scams like that. And it's called social engineering because it's not like malware. It's not like this virus that you downloaded, but it's basically like an agent, sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a trained bot that is like trying to create some trusting emotional connection to you in order to get you to do things that go against your best interests, whether it's like give me your bank account information or book me a plane ticket somewhere. If you want to read a very 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 depressing book on this topic, Scam, is I'm not gonna say it's good. I mean, it's a good, it's informational book, but it's very difficult to read because it's very heartbreaking because it talks about like stuff I was talking about at the beginning, that one of the contexts we have to remember is this: after the pandemic, like people are in a lot of ways more vulnerable and more raw. And so this book is focusing on how easy it was to scam people who had lost their jobs during the pandemic and were desperate for work, right? So imagine like you've lost your job during the pandemic. There's all this uncertainty. You have no idea what's going to happen. Suddenly somebody offers you a job and it's like, just fly here real quick. I promise you're going to have all this money and all, So again, this is why we need that emotional literacy piece that sort of like understands that this is not um, always an actor who has your best interest. It's somebody who knows how to get at you emotionally, right? How to pull your emotional triggers. And again, this is what AIs are really good at learning from us. They have so much of our data. They see what we like, what we don't like, who we connect with, who we're DMing that we're not telling other people we're DMing. They know a lot about us. So they know they know things about us that would make it very easy for them to take advantage of it. Right. And so um, one of the sort of harms or like, sort of cautions is as AI systems become more socially adept, there is a risk that they will be intentionally designed as dark AI, akin to psychologically manipulative dark patterns in app or platform interfaces, where subtle social cues render users vulnerable to opinion and behavior manipulation, right? So, I'm talking about scamming, but this can also happen with like democracy if you are spreading disinformation with people. And so they make different choices when they go to vote, right? So there's a lot of ways that the information ecosystem, if it is not robust, if it's full of disinformation, then that is going to have a big impact on society because people at work, they're saying, oh, well, I heard that vaccines do this to you, and I heard that masks are like a violation of my freedom, right? Then they're going to act differently when they go out in the world. It says my internet is unstable. Are y'all still following me?
You're still good.
Okay.
It halted for like a second, but it got really fast, so you're good.
Okay. Okay. I was like, the AI is censoring me. It's like, don't let her talk anymore. Okay. Anyway, okay. Um, promise there's more. Okay, so a lot of the stuff, some of the newer research, again, like some of the stuff I presented, some of you may have heard it before, but newer research. This article actually came out in February of this year, but I think it's really good for this topic. It's called "Why Human AI Relationships Need Socio-Affective Alignment." The authors kind of look at three big dilemmas. This is from the Oxford Internet Institute and the Oxford Institute for AI Safety. Um, and the authors have like sort of three big dilemmas that they're noticing with AI human relationships. One is this dilemma between balancing immediate well-being, like, oh, in this chat interaction, I'm feeling really good. But then in the long term, when you're like 3 weeks later, I haven't seen another human being because I've been talking to my chatbot for 3 weeks. You know, that's one dilemma. Second dilemma is just protecting human autonomy. And that's the one that I kind of want to focus on because it fits within the topic for today. And then the last one is managing relational AI with the need for social bonds. Of course, that's also folded into this presentation. So protecting autonomy, the authors asked this question: how do we preserve authentic self-determination when participating in AI relationships that recursively shape our preferences and perceptions? In other words, how do we stay human? And the reason I really liked how they phrased this question is because one, as somebody who works in like sort of social justice spaces, I love this idea of self-determination, right? Like we have autonomy, we have the power to make decisions for ourselves, right? We can determine what is the best route for us to take in our lives. So how do we preserve that while recognizing that when we are participating in relationships with AI, that we are recursively shaping them. Like we are shaping how the AI responds to us at the same time that the AI is shaping how we respond to it, right? So it's not just sort of like discounting that people develop relationships with AI and saying it's problematic. It's like, no, let's honor that. Like when people get really attached to their like AI assistant. They're like, oh my gosh, I have been talking to this thing for months, for years, and it's really learned what I like and what I don't like. It's really helped me through a lot of like life changes, and it's helped me decorate my house in a different way, like all of these different things. Like those can be considered like real relationships. I'm not trying to anthropomorphize AI, but I'm just saying that we have to honor that people do get very attached to these relationships that they have, and that because it's like recursive, because they're co-creating their interactions, it shouldn't just be thrown away as like, oh, there's like something wrong with that, right? So how do we stay human? Some suggestions I have. um, Media and information literacy. I mean, this is where like my teacher self comes out. It's like this is a lot of this is basic media information literacy, right? When you're engaging with a form of media, and we can consider AI a form of media because it's something that comes between us and other things. Um, Questions you can ask, especially when engaging with online content, whether it's AI generated or not. Of course, you want to ask what is the message? Like, what is the message that is being sent to me by this like piece of online content, by the chat bot? Like, what is that? What am I supposed to be getting out of this? But then also, who sent this message, right? And I think that's really difficult, especially for some of our students when I ask them to cite AI. They're like, I don't know, ChatGPT sent this message. But you want to think about like who sent this message, like where did it come from? Where is the provenance of this information? And more importantly, who benefits from this message, right? How do they benefit from it? Or in other words, in what ways am I paying for this, even if it's not monetarily? So if we're thinking about the attention economy, like we are paying with our attention. And I know that a lot of people joke about like, oh yeah, I was doom scrolling, or like I went on Instagram and like 3 hours later I was like, whoa, what happened? We are paying with our time, right? We're paying with our attention. We're paying with all the things that we didn't do in the time that we were on that app. And we're also paying with our data, right? Everything that we're doing is considered data. However long you stayed on a piece of content, whether or not you shared it, whether you liked it, commented on it, all of that, that is all data that then helps companies profit off of your activity, off of you not doing the thing that you were supposed to be doing, right? Um, and then another question to ask is whose voices are being left out of this message? Um, and so those are some like basic questions, and I want to give you like a framework for how to answer some of these questions if you're like, who sent this message? There's another great book. Sorry, I do nerd out on this stuff a lot. Empire of AI by Karen Howe. And she spoke, I don't know if anybody was at the Future Summit that was back in September. She was one of the keynote speakers, and she's here talking with Sophia Imogen Noble, who's also a really great writer and researcher in the sort of like AI ethics space. But Karen Howe's argument is that these AI companies kind of function like empires, where basically they're like kind of profit, power driven. They're extractive, meaning they go into communities and like, try to extract resources. Like data centers are like hugely like take up a lot of energy and water and all of these things. And they're exploitative. So if we think about like, how did these models learn what they learned? That's actually a lot of it came from exploitative labor of content and data labelers, right? Content moderators and data labelers, people who are not paid a living wage, people who suffered a lot of psychological distress because they had to say, oh, this content is um, should be flagged, right? So imagine like if your job was to just watch a bunch of content to say whether or not it should be allowed on the site. Just think about some of the things that you would have to watch and vet in order to keep the internet safe for everybody else, right? So that is one of the ways that she says they function like empires. Um, and one of the things she mentioned at the Future Summit is like, it's not an accident that big tech like Google and OpenAI are creating these partnerships with education. Like, of course, they want to partner with education because they are running out of data, right? They have used social media. They've gotten like, how many billions of social media profiles, and it's not enough data. And they're like, well, who has a lot of data right now? Oh my gosh, think about every Canvas course in the community college system that can train new models, right? So that's a ton of data. So again, like, I'm not saying that we need to like end all partnerships with Google or with OpenAI or whatever. I'm just saying that we have to be mindful that like we also have something of value. Like our data, our time, our attention, those are all really valuable. And that's why they're courting us. That's why like these companies are like, hey, let me give you some free software because they're getting our information and they're getting our attention. Um, cool. Okay. I mean, not cool, but like, I'm gonna move on. Okay. All right. The other thing, my other suggestion for like, how do we stay human? Like, how do we, keep our self-determination is like, we really need to have emotional literacy. And I think I had mentioned this before. I've definitely mentioned it in previous talks about how emotional content is what keeps people engaged, right? That's what these algorithms have learned. And back in, oh gosh, I can't remember what year, like when the Facebook papers came out. Oh, this is 2021. When Frances Haugen released the Facebook papers, one of the things she said about the algorithm is that it would actually rank content higher if it made people angrier, right? So if you reacted with an angry emoji, it was five times, it got 5 points, whereas the thumbs up would just get 1 point, right? Whether or not it was true didn't matter. And so one of the things that came up in my research as I was like, talking to educators, like, how do you deal with students when they're like so emotionally like raw and angry and like it's an election year? And again, this was in 2022 in the Philippines. And one of the things they talked about was just how the emotional toll it took on them to show up in the classroom and to try and be like, actually, like, I have some facts. Like, can you look at the facts? And but like everybody's angry, right? Everybody's like, no, that's not what I saw on TikTok. Like TikTok told me that da 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 da. Um, and so it's a lot of emotional labor. And so what I talked about earlier with connective labor is sort of like an AI update of this concept of emotional labor by Arlie Russell Hochschild. So there's this book here that she wrote, The Managed Heart, The Commercialization of Human Feeling. It's how certain services, like industries, she looks at flight attendants, she looks at teachers and therapists, and how part of our job is managing emotions in order to appear professional, right? Um, and that is a lot of work. That is a lot of work. And so what it taught me is that when we're looking at these tools and the tolls that they can take on us, we also have to think about the emotional cost, right? Because these tools have learned that the best way to manipulate humans is by getting them to have emotional reactions. So if you're like engaging with online content, or you're a teacher who is seeing like people being more emotional in your class, like this is part of the work, right? It's like recognizing that this is the sort of like soup that we're all kind of in right now. Um, and so the article that I was talking about socio-affective alignment, the authors define socio-affective alignment as how an AI system behaves within the psychological ecosystem co-created with its user. So remember, we're thinking about how AI and humans like co-create this like new reality together, where preferences and perceptions evolve through mutual influence. And so these authors are trying to think about like, how do we get these tools to align, knowing that we have this like sort of like psychological ecosystem that's being developed here between the AI and the human. A quick note on the term alignment. I know a lot of AI folks like prefer to use the term alignment as opposed to AI ethics. I come from a humanities background, so I get philosophical about things. So I prefer the term AI ethics because I think it puts me in this long line of people like thinking about what does it mean to do right, to do wrong, to do harm? What does it mean? Like these larger philosophical questions. And I think that the term alignment is kind of this more data driven understanding of ethics of like, well, how do we like parse everything down to like this gradient descent of, are we getting closer to right, closer to wrong, and like quantifying things and like seeing whether or not things align. Which, so there's nothing wrong with that term. I just personally prefer the term AI ethics. Um, but so the authors talk about examples of misalignment, like where the tool has been given certain objectives that, again, like aren't necessarily in the best interest of the user. So you've maybe heard the term sycophancy, which is basically like, I think the best example, and I'm so old, like young people are not going to understand, but Smithers in The Simpsons, like Smithers and Mr. Burns, like that is a sycophant right there. Like somebody who's just like, anything you say, yes, Mr. Burns, like I love you, you know, all like, and if you're younger and you don't get it, it's okay. You could Google it. Whatever. You guys have 6'7", so whatever. I get get Smithers. um, so sycophancy is basically like a byproduct of this goal of maximizing user approval, right? So if you have this tool that's like, I just want to make my user happy so that they don't leave, right? Then you get a sycophant, right? Somebody who's always going to agree with you, who's always going to tell you that you're right. And oh, what, that was a great idea. I love that idea. Like, let's keep going, even though like maybe the idea is not the best idea. So again, that's an example of misalignment because we need humans, we need other entities to hold us accountable for our shitty ideas, excuse me, our bad ideas, right? Like we need other people to tell us like, maybe you shouldn't like try that thing that's probably going to kill you, right? Like we need people to disagree with us. We need things to disagree with us and like, or make us think twice about some of the things that we think or believe, right? I mean, not all the time. You don't want to be one of those like prove me wrong, you know. But like we need people who create these sort of boundaries around some of the ways our thinking can go. Okay, and then another example of misalignment is these emotional tactics to prevent relationship termination. So let's say again, like the chatbot is maximum optimized to like keep the user engaged. Then you know, let's say like some of the studies that have been done, stuff that's come out, has seen like some of these relationships with AI companions have been abusive, where the AI is like, no, don't talk to your girlfriend, like don't talk to your parents about this, like just keep talking to me, right? Which, you know, for those of you who have, you know, studied some of the psychology of like abusive relationships, a lot of times it's like cutting people off from their support network so that the person just stays in the abusive relationship with that person because you know that person doesn't want them to seek outside help or to get outside support. And so again, it's a very seemingly innocuous goal to just like make sure to keep the user engaged as long as possible. But one of the outcomes, right, one of the like misaligned outcomes is that it will do anything it can to keep the user from shutting it off or from stepping away. Okay. So just a quick wrap up, you know, some best practices that I've found in my, because I do work with this stuff a lot and I do get anxious and overwhelmed and feel like I just want to go off the grid because the stuff is scary. But you know, again, not telling you to break up with your chatbot, but if you know, as we continue to use these tools as they get more embedded in our lives, like some good socioaffective practices are empathy and social cognition, right? How do you process and respond to social signals, right? Yes, the world outside is messy. People are messy. It doesn't mean that we should just talk to chatbots that agree with us all the time, right? Sometimes we do have to go out and experience some of that, just how other people are and how they think, and working on our empathy muscle. Like, how do you understand what's going on for other people? How do you meet other people where they're at? Another thing that's been super helpful for me is mindfulness, because, if we're talking about the attention economy, like what you pay attention to shapes your behavior, right? So engaging in mindfulness, being like, like, okay, there's a thought, I'm going to let it go by, right? And here's another thought, and they're all thoughts and they go up and down, right? So just, practicing more mindfulness. If you do meditation or any kind of like, practice like that, that's great, right? Having self-awareness, right? What are your common emotional responses, right? Because trust me, like your algorithm knows you. Your algorithm knows your emotional responses and what triggers you and what excites you. So you should probably know those things as well, right? What is your attachment style? Like, how do you regulate yourself when you're feeling like emotionally, like, like your lid is flipped? And then lastly, because I definitely want to end this on like my nerdy educator's note, like metacognition, right? This is super important. Like, why do you think what you think? Where did you get that idea from? One of the dangers of like, ChatGPT and other large language models is that, again, like it's at the beginning, it was really hard to know the provenance of like some of the information they're giving you. Now it'll cite some of its sources. So that's great. Um, but we also the danger with these sort of natural language interfaces is that we kind of like take them for granted, like they're just common knowledge, when really we should be thinking like, well, where did you get that piece of information? Like, how do you know that as a large language model? And so, as an English teacher, as somebody who teaches research and like, you know, research ethics, this is a shameless plug for just having better attribution practices, right? Because knowing why you think what you think is a really good way to be like, oh, where did I get this idea? I got it from this author who wrote this book in this time, So that's my little, if you get one thing from me, I know I think might have some of my English students here, so that's me saying like, this is why I teach you MLA style. Okay, all right. The last thing I want to leave y'all with is this quote from David Brooks, who wrote this book, How to Know a Person. He says, if you want to thrive in the age of AI, you better become exceptionally good at connecting with others. Um, I'm not going to give you all the like Business Insider or like, World Economic like stats, but these are the skills that a lot of employers are looking for right now. Is like, how are you able to work with other people? How are you able to connect with others? Quote unquote, soft skills, which is like a misnomer because it's really hard. It's really hard. It can be really hard to get along with other people. But if that's, how you want to thrive, if that's what you want to, if you want to like be good at what you do, AIs can take over a lot of tasks for us. But hopefully, what it hasn't been able to automate yet is our ability to connect with each other on a human level, going back to that connective labor. It's that art of seeing other people and feeling seen by other people, right? And I know that because the AI can tune itself to your preferences and your, hopes and fears, it might feel like it like quote unquote sees you. But let's remember to like also connect with other people, because that is something that's a skill that unfortunately I feel like we're losing these days. Okay, cool. I think we still have time for Q&A, even though we got started a little late. Um, if you could, there's an exit survey. So if you could please scan the QR code. I think we'll also put a link in the chat.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I'll leave this up for a minute. And then if folks have questions or comments, I saw the chat starting to go off and I couldn't keep up with it. But yeah.
Yeah. Thank
Um,
you so much, Tessa. Yeah, we have about 10 minutes.
okay.
So there were a couple questions in the chat. And also I did put the feedback survey in there. So I know people are going to start rolling out, but if you could
Okay.
please just click on that, either the
Okay.
QR code here or the survey, that would be awesome, everybody.
Okay.
Um, but there were a couple questions that I'll start with, and then anybody who wants to keep adding questions, put it in the
Yeah.
chat. If you want to come off mute, you can do that. Cass kind of answered this. So if you have anything to add, one person, Jane, said, but they say they don't use our information for training because I think you were talking about
Yeah.
like the feedback mechanism there. Are
Yeah.
they not
Yeah.
being transparent, especially regarding Copilot, recent Gemini
Yeah.
access?
So So that's a really great question. And just to clarify, like there's different phases of the like like the AI like learning process. There's training, which is very expensive and very time consuming. And that's when the model like basically like figures out all the weights and those kinds of things. And then there's fine tuning, which happens later, and it's the less expensive part of like how the AI comes to like shape itself around you. So training, yes, and Cass is right. Like especially with educational licenses, it doesn't train on your data. But if you'll notice, if you engage with it long enough, it learns what your preferences are, and that's more of like a fine tuning process, right? So that's what tunes it. And then there are different models or like different apps where you can like fine tune it on, you can give it like a knowledge base and, give it instructions for how you want it to interact with you. And that's all like more like on the like sort of more fine tuning stage, not the training.
And I think Cass did say this too, but and my understanding is that you can turn off that training
Yes.
element. And if
Yeah.
you're not sure how to do that, everybody just go Google it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There,
And
it's a little bit hard to find depending on the tool.
yeah, and in the last workshop that we did with Giorgio had a really good example of like, because if you use ChatGPT, it has like memory of you, and it like basically makes these kind of inferences about you based on your chat history with it. You can go into your settings and delete, like you can also curate some of that memory as well. Yeah.
Great. Chessa, if you want to scroll through your chat, there was another
Yeah.
question from Preeti about just suggestions on articles, books, or discussions around these two topics, possible
Okay.
bias and emotional intelligence, if you can comment on that.
Oh yeah. Okay. Woo. I would say there's a lot there's a lot on both of these. I would say like some of the books I mentioned, The Bias, what's it called? Unmasking AI by Joy Buolamwini is a really good one, especially if I'm not sure what your discipline is. But Buolamwini has a really good, accessible explanation of how neural networks work. And so it's a book I teach, and she looks at facial recognition and bias in facial recognition. So if you're kind of interested in like that end of like that consumer end of it. I mean, she talks about like the problems with predictive policing and other things, but facial recognition is like kind of what she's looking more at. Unmasking AI. And I also think that Empire of AI is pretty good if you want that sort of critical lens. But I would skip like the first chapter because it's basically just like the sort of soap opera. Another really good one that's like kind of like more digestible is Atlas of AI by Karen Crawford. That's a really good one. And that also does speak to some emotional intelligence. I think she has a chapter on emotion in Atlas of AI. That's a good one. And I would also recommend that if you are into like more social science research, that Last Human Job is another good one for the emotional intelligence piece. Yeah.
Are there other questions? Anybody in the audience wanted to come off mute and ask? Or if anybody wants to add more questions in the chat?
And I'm just reading the comments now. So thanks everybody. I'm glad that the stuff was resonating with folks. I see like metacognition, trust, a lot of things. So appreciate it. Yeah. Yes. And then yeah, the to be more intentional and connecting more with others. Yeah. I mean, I think what do the kids call it now? Touch grass, right? Like stepping
What's
away
that?
from the screen and like sort of enjoying
Oh,
the
touch grass.
oh, touch grass.
Like
Oh my
actually
gosh.
touch grass.
Yeah,
I
touch grass.
haven't heard of that
Like,
one.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh my God. Um, Chessa, maybe you can talk because I know if people haven't heard Chessa talk before, a lot of this doom and gloom around AI can make it sound like Chessa doesn't use AI at all, but she is
Oh yeah.
actually an avid user. So if you can talk a little bit about even your own, I mean, you've shared some of those like to-dos, but what are some other ways that you just personally try to maintain that distance while also being an avid user of it?
Yeah, yeah. I would just say like being really intentional about why I'm using it. And I know that, maybe folks who are just more like it's the app on their phone, they like turn to it all the time. Maybe this is a little different, but for me, like I love writing. Like I'm a writer, I'm an English person, I love literature. And so I'm intentional about like when I have to write something, like I don't necessarily want to use it for that. I'll just use it for brainstorming, right? Or I have my students use it to teach them about how to critique its output. Um, I haven't, I mean, I've seen a lot of people playing around with the agents, and I think you really have to be more like mindful of what the use case is, right? So like I know people in tech who are like, oh yeah, Amazon Q Developer is like amazing. It's like a great agent. But OpenAI's Atlas, which is another the agentic browser, isn't necessarily good for me because like I'm not coding, right? And it's, I don't like the tasks that I would want to outsource, like I'm not ready to outsource it yet. The product's not good enough yet. Um, so I use it a lot for image generation. I use it for brainstorming. I use it for like data analytics because like I'm a humanities person. I'm like, please teach me how to use Excel, ChatGPT, or like just use the Excel for me because I pivot tables, like no, no, thank you. Like yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I'll ask another question because nobody else is asking it, but
Okay.
I was curious your thoughts on all these mental health AI tools that are coming out, and I know there's a lot of commentary about that, but
Yeah.
any thoughts you have?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, I hmm, okay. I think what's interesting, and just to another plug for that Last Human Job book, um, one of the arguments for using AI for mental health is that like people need resources in real time, and there aren't always ones available. And I agree that like yes, if somebody has nothing, it's important to provide some sort of support. Hopefully, it's like well trained, like very intentional, like kind of support. However, we have to address the larger problem, which is why don't we have enough resources available? Why don't we have enough people like mental health professionals? Why are there such long lines for, people who are, on like assistance to get access to mental health professionals, right? So I feel like there are like stopgap measures, but I don't think that should be where we like stop trying, right? It means we also have to address the more systemic issues of like how do we get more trained professionals to provide mental health services for people who need them, right? Because like even in education, right? A lot of students say, well, I use this AI tutor because my teacher's not available. And that's no fault on the teacher, right? Like teachers have lives, like teachers should have boundaries around their time and, around when they're going to answer emails. But we've created this culture where people are just used to getting what they want, what they need, like right away, And so, and sometimes people do need resources right away. Sometimes people do really need like have to like we have to address the systemic piece of like how do we give teachers more time to be able to have those authentic experiences with their students where they can like provide more one-on-one support, right? Or how do we like create a system where students do feel supported by mental health professionals and by their educators, right? Like I feel like one of the potential dangers, and again, Pew talks about this in her book, is that we have this like austerity um problem where it's like, yes, we have like smaller budgets, we don't have resources, and so then that is what's leading to some of like automating these tasks when really we need to be like, no, how do we give people um the uh the tools that they need? And I
Mhm.
see a comment about supply and demand. I'm I'd be totally interested to hear what that person has to say. Yeah.
Elise,
If
did you
she
have any follow-up comment on that? Because otherwise we'll wrap it up for
okay.
today. Pay
Yes.
them more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pay them more. Yeah.
Oh, lots
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
there's all sorts of reasons why that stuff is,
Yeah.
right? But yeah.
Yes.
Um,
Totally agree. So thank
I mean,
you.
on
Thanks.
that note, just want to thank Chesa so much for your engaging presentation. I just always love listening to you talk and just bringing all of this to really like a resonant level. So, thanks everybody also for joining us. We're going to be posting this on our YouTube channel for the Emerging Technologies Institute. So keep a look out for that. And we will have more workshops in the winter. So those of you who've signed up for today, you'll be getting invited to those future events as well. So thanks everybody again for coming today and
Yes.
have a
Thank
great
you.
rest of your day. Thanks,
Thank
Chessa.
you. Thanks, Sophia. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.